It's likely that some of you read about the announced closing of the House of Hope, which is on Dundas Street and which has been part of the homeless response from the city for the last couple of years. It's a former hotel that was on Dundas Street that's been rented out by London Cares, and in which some 40 residents have gone into who have required long-term care. Now, it was just announced this week that they were going to have to close their doors in November because of a lack of provincial funding that they hoped to be able to acquire, but which didn't come forward. I think it's good for us to unpack that because there's a larger story that Londoners have been confounded by for a number of years. We need to remember the background to all of our homelessness. I was out this morning at a meeting with some folks who were saying, like, what is it? Like, what is causing it? Why can't we get around it? Some had solutions. Some had different kinds of solutions. Everybody was blaming politics or the city. Some were blaming the homeless themselves. But let's just talk about it for a minute to see why we are in the situation we are in and why there's over 2,000 homeless people in London right now. And then I want to go back to the Center of Hope, the House of Hope, to talk about why it was so necessary for us. We need to remember the story of how homelessness has really gotten a grip in all of our communities across the country, not just in London, and why so many civic governments are having a dickens of a time trying to get around it to be able to do anything about it. For years, we had a social contract that existed between the federal government and the provincial governments across the country. It was called the Canada Assistance Plan. It was designed for something that would give 50% from the feds, 50% from the provinces, and they would cover things like health and education, those kind of things, housing as well. And for decades, Canada ran pretty well under that. I mean, really, there wasn't the kind of poverty that there is today, although there had been before World War II with the Depression. But that Canada Assistance Plan, people decided it was now time to try to do something about that, to equalize some degree the massive gap between the rich and the poor. So the Canada Assistance Plan was provided. I grew up in that time in Calgary, Alberta, not at all seeing the needs that I'm seeing today now that I'm 75. It's quite something what has happened in Canada. The gap between the rich and poor is significant. We have never had more money in Canada. We have something like a $16 trillion economy, and we have over a $2 trillion gross domestic product. So there's money out there. But for some reason, our communities are having real trouble getting in touch with the homeless problem that they're facing. Over time, and especially during the recession of the 1990s, this is shortly after food banks were born, the federal government had a deficit and a debt. And it decided that what it was going to do was that it was ingenious in its own way. They would just download that debt to provinces. So provinces woke up one day to discover that rather than the traditional kind of shared costing of these social challenges and educational and health challenges that they were facing, suddenly they were presented with a whole bunch of things that they were going to have to cover. Some of those things were like health and university education and other things. And what the federal government said is that, we will download these responsibilities to you. You have it. And then we will, though, provide the resources that are necessary for you to deliver them. At the time, I remember thinking, I'm not sure that that's right, but I didn't fully understand it all. But what the federal government was saying, what's good about this is it allows more local treatment of the problems that are happening across the country. It was an attempt to rationalize what was really a whole new architecture for how we take care of our social problems in the country. The provinces looked at that and went, what? And for many of them, they said, okay, you know what? The federal government has said that they will give us a bulk lump of money to each of the provinces and the territories in the country. And what we will do is we will take that money, because there was no conditions to it, and that they would put it into other things that they were interested in as provincial governments. It did not go into the things overall that the Canada Assistance Plan did. One of those things was a housing plan. Now, you know about the housing plan. I grew up in one of those houses in Calgary. My parents had survived World War II. My mom came over here from Scotland, and we lived in one of these houses that had been built. Now, we rented it. My parents never owned a house, but we rented it along with thousands of other families who had found it affordable. Back then, the idea of housing was it should be roughly 2 to 3 times the price of what your annual wage was. So if you were making, say, $10,000 a year, housing was then kind of indexed or plateaued at something like $30,000. So that put housing within reach of tons of people, millions of people. And Canada began to boom. And houses were seen as a form of security. Not just as an asset, which they are now, but they were a form of security which permitted people to have a home, a place to bring up children, a place to find comfort and relaxation and a sense of togetherness and neighborliness with other people in similar situations. But Canada, the federal government, got rid of that in that decade of the 1990s. Suddenly it came down to provinces and territories and regions. And their job then was to take care of that. So that whole national housing register, the whole national housing effort to build housing for people across the country and keep it affordable suddenly went out the window, and it was up to provinces. So what provinces did is they took that one lump sum kind of treatment they got from the federal government every year. They never applied it to housing. In most cases, they applied it to their own vested interests that they had as provincial governments. And at that point, they downloaded housing to municipalities. And I watched it all unfold. I was a food bank director at the time. And this was roughly 1995 here in Ontario. And what ended up happening is that they downloaded all of that housing problem to municipalities like London, but did not give the resources that were necessary to deal with it. Now, if you're a city, that's a direct problem. It's not like food banks in which we're talking about people donating food. Housing is expensive. It's not something that a city can do much about. I remind you that a city can only raise taxes as property taxes. They can't go out there like the federal government or provincial government, those senior jurisdictions, and just charge for taxes. Cities can't do that nearly as well. They're very limited in their opportunities. So suddenly, cities began to see people on the streets. These are people that didn't have places to go. The former places like psychiatric institutes or federal structures or provincial structures that once used to house these people and give them 24-hour service to help them in this particular difficult time of their lives, suddenly those things were closed up and let go. The provincial government said the best thing to do is just like the federal government had said, the best thing to do is to put these problems and their solution into the communities in which they exist. So that was the plan. And the rationale was what we'll do is we'll put all of that responsibility to cities, but we'll provide housing for what they called neighborhood or halfway houses that would help people who were in trouble and were homeless. I think we've all now seen the result of that. It was after that the Great Recession, the Great Recession came, as you know. That came about while I was in Parliament. And I mean, the scrambling that we were all trying to do at that time to try to help cities survive that great downturn in the economy, that was tough. And then, of course, comes the pandemic not too long afterwards. Cities were left on the edge. London was left on the edge. How can London possibly take care of a problem of 2,000 people that are homelessness when they were at the end of a downloading trend that happened from the federal government to the provincial government and down to cities? It was a problem. But that downloading has not ended. The downloading then went from feds to province to cities, and then cities began to hand it down to agencies. And this is where the problem came in. All these agencies exist. We know all of them as a food bank. We supply a good number of them. But these people are very serious in what they're trying to do. Everybody says, why are there so many of them? Well, with 2,000 people in excess who are living on the streets, that's why there are all these agencies. This was something that used to be the government's responsibility, but which it had passed on to city, who then passed it on to agencies. And agencies were overwhelmed. That really happened a lot during the pandemic, and you know about that. But now suddenly in the recent last couple of years, what's begun to happen is that there is not enough money to help to pay for all of these significant efforts to deal with homelessness. You have people on the streets, and it is true. And we as a food bank help with programs to help to provide for those folks. But what do you do if you want to end homelessness? There's really only two things. One is senior levels of government have to get back to taking care of this problem that they helped to create. I'm talking about the federal government, and I'm talking about the provincial governments across the country. Most provincial governments have bailed on this responsibility, as they have on healthcare. Doesn't mean that those things don't still exist, but they don't have the kind of funding that's required anymore to deal effectively with the problems that are in our communities. So what we have now are agencies that we're now seeing beginning to run out of funds. The city doesn't have the funds to give it. They can participate and help with supplemental funding, but it really has to be funding that comes from the federal government or from the provincial government, and then the city can add their own component to it. But there's no way any city in Canada can cover the complete cost of it. And so we are now in a situation in which you see Safe Space, which was an agency that's been around for a number of years that helped vulnerable people. They announced last week that they're going to have to close permanently. And now here we see the House of Hope, which is run by London Cares and has had a lot of success in long-term dealing with people that are homeless. Now it's announcing that it's going to have to close because of a lack of provincial funding. The city stands ready. And I'll say this again, the city stands ready to do its share of the funding for that. But the bulk of the cost came from the province. And the moment that the province did not renew that, the city was left holding on to something they couldn't possibly afford. So one way of getting rid of homelessness is just have those governments do their jobs, which they said they would do and is really part of federalism. It's been designed that way from the beginning of the country. There's a second way. And a second way is very expensive, and it's not easy. It's that you take these people that are homeless and you put them into situations, and this is what the Health and Homeless Fund that's in London is very innovative. It's had its hits and misses, but overall it attempted to really handle the problem about taking people that are homeless, taking the ones that are really suffering the worst under that, and putting them into these longer care facilities that could get them some counseling, food, all of those other things that could help them in the long term to get themselves back on their feet and back out into community. That is what the House of Hope did for 2 years. It had 40 clients, many of whom were making great progress and moving ahead because they had a consistent support system that used to be in our communities across the country before the seniors' jurisdictions built on them. That is now gone. It's not at all to the degree that it needs to be. So the House of Hope is going to have to close down in November. What happens to that homeless? What happens to the part of the community that banked on the fact that when government said you need to do something serious for the people that are the most serious in homelessness, provide them real long-term care and help them to get them back on their feet? Well, that's precisely what the House of Hope is. It's monitored by all sorts of official groups in the city, including health groups and others. And then all of a sudden, a province says, nah. Now, well, that's fine. The province can go ahead and do that. But those very people that are now in the House of Hope will be back out on the streets. These are the very same streets that businesses in the East End and others and residents in different neighborhoods, so on and so forth, Londoners in general, have said, look, we want these people off the streets. We want them off the streets and into these places that can really care for them. And then the province just turns around and says, yeah, we hear you. We know that's right, but we're not going to fund that kind of pathway. And those people end up back on the streets, and Londoners just exist in frustration. Look at this. When we talk about homelessness and the failure of it, there's a lot of reasons for it, but ultimately it's because governments themselves have not failed to live up to their responsibility. I'm not trying to put the whole blame on government. And London is one of those models that did not attempt to do that. Despite all the troubles that we were facing from all the downloading that was happening to London. The Health and Homeless Fund, the London Community Foundation, all of these different agencies, they all came together and said, you know what? We understand it's difficult for the city, so we're going to come together. One particular family donated over $20 million. Other people came in and donated to that fund. So this wasn't all on government. This was the city mobilizing, bringing itself together. But when you've got over 2,000 people homeless, they can only do a bit at a time. And it's expensive. It's expensive to take somebody in. It'd be like somebody going into a merge because they've got a problem and they come out at the end of the day and go back home. There are other people that have to be admitted to hospital because what's wrong is that serious. And it needs more proper care and monitoring. That's what these larger structures and ideas are for the Homeless Fund. So what we're talking about here is a real dearth of imagination. People are so fixed with the homeless problem. They are across the country. As I said, it's not unique to London. But when the answers to it are known and the research is there, somebody has to come up and say, well, who is going to pay for that? It's true that that's there. It's like medical treatment. Some medical treatments are more expensive than others, and that's also true for homelessness. If we want to keep these people off the streets and give them a chance of finding dignity, a place to live, an ability to be able to earn a wage or to go out and buy their own groceries or whatever it is that they have to do to be part of a family, to be part of a community, then we are going to have these structures. And this week, by the announcement from the House of Hope that it is going to have to close, we've turned our back on that solution. Now, are Londoners to blame? Not overall, they're not. They're frustrated. They've had years of this homeless thing, and it's not easy. Is the city government to blame? I think in part, and it's not because they haven't given funds to those causes that are out there that are very important. But what they have done is they've allowed this kind of pessimism to grow within our city about some of this stuff. They've even squabbled amongst themselves as council as to how to handle this. And there's some city councillors that seem bent and determined to not let some of these things happen. So yes, they play a role, especially morally, ethically. As communities try together, they really look at their city council because that's the nearest to them to help to provide those problems. And what the city council then needs to do is it needs to sit down with people like me and people like you, and it needs to say, we have to go back to the province, all of us together. But we don't do that, see, in London. Lots of communities don't. What we do is we blame the city. And then the city goes up to the province and says, please, like we're really feeling the heat back here. We really need your support. But the problem is it's the city council up there in front of Queen's Park or whatever it is, when the truth of the matter, it needs to be thousands and thousands of Londoners, people who have nothing to do with homelessness or whatever it is, but people who realize that their community, the welfare of their children in the future, matters from citizens, organizations, faith groups, businesses, and political groups all come together and they go up to Queen's Park and they fight for what is rightfully ours through the structure of federalism. It's sad. It's another tragic tale that we've lost safe space. We're about ready to lose the House of Hope in November. And there are other closures that we've heard about that might be coming as well as a food bank. We're trying to help those groups. This is what it's come down to, folks. I know this is a bit of a lengthy video, but it's important that we understand the structure as to how homeless became the problem that it is, homelessness, and then what it is that we have to do. These problems in no way, in any way, shape, or form can be solved locally. Because Canada was structured in such a way after World War II that it not only went for prosperity, it also went for security. So it meant that all Canadians got into this venture together, that we would share together not only the prosperity, but that we would share the vulnerability. And if there are vulnerable people in our community, then we ourselves will share to help them. The governments now say, that's a great idea. Yeah, donate to the food bank or donate to your favorite cause. That will never end those causes. It's the joint sharing that governments must go back to do if we're ever going to defeat them. If not, We're going to have prosperity with terrible poverty. We're already in that place. It's time to end all that. But for that to happen, we need to all speak up. We all need to get behind our city councilors and the agencies and the others and say, look, we're not trying to cry penny poor all the time. But what we're saying is we've tried to live by a structure that you yourselves have created as federal and provincial governments. Please live up to those responsibilities, because we're already punching above our weight. We're trying to handle a problem that's already far too great for us, but we're doing our best. So if you get your chance, speak up. Say for sure. We need everybody. It's all hands on deck here, because this problem of homelessness is only getting worse. It's not getting better. And until federalism is again rediscovered in a new way, then we're going to be stuck with these problems, these social problems in our cities across the country, and they will continue to drag us under. Speak up when you can.